Hello everyone, very good morning and welcome to Byju's exam prep. First of all, apologies for the delay. We were facing a technical issue at our back end and unfortunately the class got delayed by almost 30 minutes. So again, apologies for that. So let's get started with the last class for internal security. We'll begin with the few remaining topics under Northeast insurgency. Yesterday we had covered few important topics like Naga insurgency and few insurgencies in Assam. I'll continue the discussion from here. We'll try to wrap up this chapter and then we will head towards the smaller topics that are important for internal security. Let's start with Bodo insurgency in Assam. So yesterday we have studied few types of insurgencies in Assam. We spoke about Ulfa's insurgency. We spoke about the various statehood movements and the movements for constitutional autonomy. Now let's study the last major insurgent movement from Assam, which is Bodo insurgency. So this topic is extremely important, especially for your mains, because just 3 years ago, that is in 2020, the third Bodo peace accord was signed. And today this insurgency has come to an end. So when this deal was signed in 2020, it was the third peace agreement with Bodo groups. And it was a major development because it was a huge achievement for the government to bring the Bodo insurgency to an end. Because at one point, Bodo insurgency was a major threat for India. So let's understand who are the Bodos, where can you find them? What were the demands? What were the root causes that led to the insurgent movement and how did it evolve and what threat did it pose to India? Let's study this first and then we will talk about the peace agreements. The Bodos constitute an ethno-linguistic community. They are a minority ethnic group found in the Brahmaputra Valley of Assam. If you look at the map of Assam in the northwest region, towards the northwest region, this is where you find the Bodo districts. Please look at this map. You're looking at the map of the state of Assam, and to the north of Brahmaputra Valley, towards the northwest region of Assam, this is where you find the 4 Bodo districts. There are 4 districts located here where the Bodo community can be found. This includes Kokrajhar, Chirang, Udalguri, and Baksa. Please make a note of this. This can be important even for your prelims. There can be a prelims question on the Bodo community and where they are found. So the Brahmaputra river flows down over here, and to the northwest region, you find these 4 Bodo districts. So this community is a distinct ethno-linguistic community, meaning they are a distinct ethnic tribe, they are a minority ethnic group of Assam, and they speak a distinct language, which is the Bodo language. So the Bodo language is integral to their culture. Is that clear? So this community has always felt threatened by the dominant group in Assam, that is the Assamese. Especially since 1970s, 1980s, the Bodos felt that they were being discriminated, that they were being oppressed by the government of Assam, which was dominated by the Assamese. Now, this sentiment came up amongst the Bodos as a result of the Assam agitation that we studied yesterday. Remember, yesterday we spoke about illegal migration into Assam from Bangladesh, how the Assamese felt threatened and started a widespread agitation that even triggered Ulfa's insurgency. So as the Assamese were protesting against the presence of outsiders, and as they were looking to protect their rights, their land, and these protests turned violent as well. The other minority groups like the Bodos, they felt threatened. So even they took up this issue that outsiders are a threat to them, and they even started referring to the Assamese as outsiders. It was in this context that the Bodo movement was born in mid 1980s. Yesterday we studied that the Assam agitation came to an end in 1985 with the signing of the Assam Accord. So under the Assam Accord, the government of India made promises to the Assamese community. The government promised that NRC will be updated to distinguish Indian citizens from foreigners. The government said a committee will be set up to determine special provisions for Assamese through reservation and government benefits. Right? The government also said special protection will be given to the land and resources of Assamese. So these special provisions that were promised to the Assamese triggered insecurities amongst the smaller groups like the Bodos. So until then, Bodos were pretty comfortable. They had no issues as such. But as the Assam agitation ended with all these promises made for Assamese, suddenly some Bodo leaders and Bodo outfits, they started expressing a concern that they are being discriminated in the state. The argument was that the Assam government is dominated by Assamese and the majority group is dominating over them. This was the grievance, which was not entirely genuine. Based on this, a Bodo movement started, a Bodo land movement, because the community is concentrated mainly in these 4 districts and they wanted to protect their distinct identity by protecting their geographical area. So Bodo movement, which started out in the 1980s, it acquired different forms over the years. Different Bodo groups came up and they all had different demands, and the kind of movement they carried out was also different. There were one set of groups which were just political groups, meaning they did not resort to any violence, but they only had some demands, especially demand for autonomy. They would settle for more autonomy given to Bodo districts, and they were hoping for constitutional autonomy under 6th schedule. There were few insurgent groups of the Bodos that took up violence, that took up armed violence against the state. And their demand was just statehood. They just wanted a separate state, as I was mentioning yesterday as well. Right? They just wanted the Bodo districts to be carved out of Assam, and they wanted a new state to be established within India. But there were few other notorious insurgent groups which are labeled as terrorist organizations that engaged in large-scale massive violence that wanted outright independence from India. So there were few separatist groups as well. Understood? So amongst the Bodo groups, there were 3 kinds. Few Bodo political groups asking only for autonomy, few armed insurgent groups engaging in some limited violence, and they were asking only for statehood, a separate state in India. And there were some extremely violent terrorist organizations which were leading a separatist movement. They wanted to break these Bodo districts from India itself to form an independent nation that they referred to as Bodo land, the land of the Bodos. So this is how the Bodo movement was organized. So initially, an insurgent group called the BDSF, the Bodo Security Force, was established. And this was an armed organization fighting for independence. It was clearly a secessionist outfit, meaning it was a separatist group calling for independence of Bodo areas from India. The BDSF started carrying out attacks, not just against the security forces, but also against the state government, government institutions, and even against all the outsiders. The Bodos started claiming that all outsiders are a threat to the Bodo community. So basically, any non-Bodo was referred to as an outsider. Even Assamese would be seen as outsiders. Any illegal migrants from Bangladesh would be seen as outsiders. And also, don't forget, this region that I just showed you in the map, it's a major hub for tea plantations. The popular Assamese tea is largely grown here, right? And in these plantations, there are many workers who are brought here from the British, who were brought here by the British during the colonial time. A few tribes from central and eastern India, like Santals, Mundas, etc., right? They were transported here by the British to make them work as laborers in the tea plantations. Because this was a very big enterprise for the British. It was the British who started tea cultivation and it became a major export for them. So to run these plantations, they needed cheap labor and they brought tribes from central and eastern India and made them to work in these tea plantations. So these tribes from central and eastern India had settled over here over generations. So even they were being referred to as non-Bodos and as outsiders. Since they belong to distinct tribes from central eastern India who were transported by the British, the Bodo group, the BDSF, started referring to all of them as non-Bodos and outsiders. So this armed group started targeting all these entities. The security forces of the center, the state government and its institutions, and as well as all non-Bodos, including Assamese and tea plantation workers, were targeted by the BDSF. So by late 1980s, the violence carried out by this group started increasing. This outfit was established by a notorious terrorist, Ranjan Daimari. Ranjan Daimari was the leader who founded this organization and started this armed separatist movement against India, which started committing atrocities against civilians. That is, all the non-Bodos were being brutally targeted by this outfit. Is that clear? So as the violence increased, obviously, India responded with counter-insurgency operations targeted against the group. ASPA was extended to the Bodo districts as well. Because don't forget, AFSPA was already in place in Assam since 1950s. First, it was brought here to tackle Naga insurgency. Then, as Ulfa insurgency broke out, it had been extended to cover most parts of Assam. And once Bodo insurgency broke out in 1980s, AFSPA was extended to the Bodo areas as well. So these security operations helped in weakening ND, that is the BDSF. It helped in weakening the Bodo Security Force, the BDSF. Parallelly, the government of India, with the state government, started negotiating with some of the moderate sections of the Bodo outfits. The more moderate Bodo political groups, they were brought to the negotiating table by the central government and the state government. Because the government wanted to bring this to a quick end. So while the security forces were targeting the armed insurgent group, that is BDSF, parallelly negotiations were started with the moderate political groups which were only asking for more autonomy. So as a result of these negotiations, the first Bodo Accord was signed in the year 1993. Please remember this, it's a very important point. In 1993, the first Bodo Accord was signed between the government of India, government of Assam, and the Bodo political groups, the moderate factions of the Bodo groups. So under this, Bodo Land Autonomous Council was established and limited autonomy was provided to this part of Assam. But please make a note that this autonomy was not constitutional autonomy. It was not under the 6th schedule. Is that clear? It was just a legal autonomy provided. It was not under the Constitution of India. It was not under the 6th schedule that we studied yesterday. So initially, when autonomy was provided here and the Autonomous Council was set up to administer these 4 districts, It was just legal autonomy and limited autonomy that was given without constitutional status. So this was the first Bodo Accord of 1993, signed with the few Bodo political groups that were only asking for autonomy from the state government especially. So some subjects were transferred to the Autonomous Council. Few administrative powers, executive powers were transferred, and legislative powers were transferred to provide for greater delegation and decentralization. So this satisfied the demands of these Bodo political groups, and they stopped their movement. They were not engaging in any violence. They were just leading a political movement, and they stopped this movement following the signing of the first Bodo Accord. Because that is what their demand was. They were happy with the limited autonomy given that would give them more flexibility to administer their land and to protect their culture and their resources. So with this, we tackled the Bodo political outfits, but the deal was strongly opposed by BDSF. The armed outfit, headed by Ranjan Daimari, strongly opposed the deal, and it underwent a restructuring in 1994. This group, which had completely broken away from the Bodo movement, it turned itself into a new organization known as NDFB, the National Democratic Front of Bodoland. And NDFB, headed by Ranjan Daimari, took shelter in Bangladesh. It established a major safe haven in Bangladesh due to the support provided by the hostile Bangladeshi government. Obviously, there was an element of Pakistani involvement, where Pakistan was providing support to Northeast insurgents via Bangladesh. So both Bangladesh and Pakistan were extending state support to this notorious group, which we designated as a terrorist organization. NDFB was nothing but a brutal terrorist organization, because this group has carried out many major attacks in Assam. It has engaged in brutal, mindless violence. As I told you, it was not just targeting security forces like most insurgent groups do, but it was also targeting innocent civilians, Assamese and the tea plantation workers, and anybody who would be branded as illegal migrants from Bangladesh, the Bengali migrants. They would all be targeted by this outfit. Is that clear? So it almost began an ethnic cleansing campaign. It started targeting people on the lines of their ethnicity, on the lines of their religion as well. So this group attacked Assamese, the tea plantation workers who were from central Indian tribes like Santals, Mundas, and others. They became the primary target. Is that clear? And NDFB started holding a lot of grudge against Bengali illegal migrants. In the name of targeting the Bengali illegal migrants, NDFB gave this a communal angle. It added a communal color to this and branded any Bengali speaking Muslim in the region, and they were branded as illegal migrants from Bangladesh, and they would be targeted by this outfit. So this led to targeted attacks against certain ethnic groups and certain religious groups. Remember, I told you yesterday that illegal migrants who have come from Bangladesh, they are both Bengali Hindus and Bengali Muslims as well. Here in Assam, there are Indian citizens who are Bengali Muslims who speak Bengali, because the Bengali language is widespread from Odisha to West Bengal to Bangladesh to Assam. Across the region, you find Bengali language and Bengali culture being practiced. So there are Bengali Muslims in Assam who are Indians actually. They are not from Bangladesh. They are not illegal migrants. But these Bengali Muslims were targeted by NDFB, and they would label them as Bangladeshi migrants. This was religious targeting, communal targeting. They targeted Assamese. They targeted the tea plantation workers, and this was ethnic targeting. It was essentially an ethnic cleansing campaign, and that is why I refer to NDFB as a terrorist outfit. Is that clear? So NDFB became a major threat for India. India designated the group as a terrorist outfit, and our intelligence and security agencies started targeting this group. And the irony and the hypocrisy of the group is that it ran away from India, took shelter in Bangladesh. Look at the irony of that. Look at the hypocrisy here. This group is targeting outsiders, attacking Assamese and other tribes and the Muslims in the region, including Indians, right? It says it is fighting against illegal migration from Bangladesh. And they themselves went to Bangladesh illegally and took support and set up a safe haven in Bangladesh. It's like ULFA. How ULFA also said that we oppose illegal migration and they took support in Bangladesh itself. So what explains this hypocrisy? Only these terrorists can explain that. So NDFB would engage in mindless violence, which completely destabilized Assam, especially the Bodo districts. So even though we had signed the first Bodo Accord and provided autonomy by working out a deal with the political groups, this group, the BDSF, which had transformed itself into NDFB, escalated the violence, and thus 1990s became a brutal decade in the Bodo areas. In fact, until early 2000, NDFB remained a major threat. Throughout 1990s, all the way until 2009, until Sheikh Hasina came to power. During these 2 decades, NDFB remained a major threat for India. But in between, there was something very interesting that happened. In the mid-90s, another Bodo outfit was formed, a Bodo armed insurgent group, which emerged as a rival of NDFB. This group was called the BLTF, Bodo Liberation Tiger Force. Is that clear? Bodo Liberation Tiger Force was established by some of the other Bodos, and this became a rival group, and these groups, they started targeting each other because they had different objectives. Their goals were different, their composition was different. So this is something unique that we witnessed with regard to the Bodo conflict. Is that clear? This outfit, the new outfit which was formed called BLTF, it only wanted statehood. It was not a separatist movement entirely, right? It wasn't happy with autonomy. It wasn't happy with the first Bodo Accord. So it wanted complete statehood to carve out these areas from Assam and to form a new state in India. So the demands were entirely contrasting between NDFB and BLTF, and as a result, they emerged as rivals of each other. They started targeting and attacking each other. And another interesting thing is that if you look at the composition of these groups, there was a clear religious divide. BLTF was a Hindu-dominated outfit. NDFB was a Christian outfit. Now, this is very interesting. See, most Northeast insurgent groups are left-wing extremist organizations. If you look at their doctrine, their structure, their way of operations, we can clearly say that these are left-wing extremist political organizations. But there have been some insurgent outfits which have aligned with religious ideology as well, which is quite unique. Because usually religious extremism is a part of right-wing extremism. Both are polar opposites, right? They're diametrically opposite to each other. But in Northeast India, there have been few left-wing extremist insurgent groups. They are left-wing extremist organizations, but curiously, there is a religious connection. For example, yesterday we studied NSCN. Did you know that NSCN wants Nagalim to be a Christian country? That's another example. It is a left-wing extremist outfit. Its doctrine, its objectives, its structure, and the way it operates, right, clearly says that it is a left-wing extremist political organization. But this group, which was fighting for so-called Nagalim, Greater Nagaland, by liberating all the Naga areas, it wanted this future state to be a Christian country. The same with NDFB. NDFB was a Christian-dominated group. Even though it's a left-wing extremist organization, it wanted a future Bodo land, a nation that they were fighting for, to be a Christian country. On the other hand, BLTF, which was formed by a few other Bodos who were demanding statehood, right? This was a Hindu-dominated group. The reason why the religious angle also comes in Northeast India is because over a period of time, different religions have tried to exercise their influence across Northeast India. See, generally, indigenous tribes, they don't follow mainstream religions, be it Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, right? They're usually away from mainstream religions. They have their own customs, their own tribal faith, which is unique to them, right? They worship the forest, they worship the nature around them, the animals, the elements of nature, etc. Right? So each tribe, each indigenous ethnic group, they will have their own individual customs and religious practices, which is very distinct from your mainstream religion. But over centuries, major religions have tried to extend their influence and they've tried to convert people. They've tried to push people to adopt their faith. During British rule, there were Christian missionaries from Europe who would try to propagate Christianity across Northeast India. If you look at the religious profile of Northeast India, Christianity is a dominant religion today. This was a new entrant. Historically, a few centuries ago, let's say you go back 500 years ago, Northeast India was a tribal society with tribal religious beliefs, right? But Christianity was spread by the Christian missionaries. Similarly, Islam and Hinduism was also propagated later as a counter to Christianity. So very few ethnic groups and tribes had adopted major religions like Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. It was spread later, right? So that is why you see this divide within ethnic groups as well. There are few Bodo Hindus, Bodo Christians, and that is what led to the split, the division, and their objectives were also different. While NDFB wanted full independence and it was targeting all non-Bodos, BLTF was seen as a more relatively moderate insurgent group fighting only for statehood. So because of their rivalry, they started targeting each other and the violence increased further. Got it? So please make a note of this. Another example for this category is MNF, Mizo National Front. The Mizo National Front, which triggered an insurgent war in Mizoram. It was also a separatist group fighting for independence of the Mizo region. This group, even though it's a left-wing extremist organization, it wanted the future Mizo country to be a Christian country. So these are some curious cases in Northeast India. That is, left-wing extremist organizations wanting a future state to be a religious country aligned with a particular religious ideology. So that is something very unique that you can observe in Northeast India in case of these insurgent movements. So now NDFB and BLTF emerged as rivals. They started targeting each other. And as a result, the threat increased. The region got further destabilized. And the tea plantation workers and the Central Indian tribes, they formed their own groups for their self-defense called the Bengali Tiger Force. Is that clear? The Bengali community present here, which included Indian citizens and as well as some illegal migrants, plus the tea plantation workers together, they formed a self-defense armed group. They also procured weapons because they were being targeted by NDFB, right? Large-scale ethnic and communal attacks were being carried out against them. So to defend themselves and to protect themselves against NDFB attacks, they formed an armed organization called Bengali Tiger Force, which was essentially a self-defense force. So essentially in 1990s, we had three different armed organizations in Bodo areas. One was NDFB, engaging in brutal terrorist violence, BLTF, which was relatively moderate, engaging in violent insurgency, and BTF or Bengali Tiger Force, formed by the Bengali community and as well as by the tea plantation workers. So this was the situation in the Bodo areas. There have been a lot of rumors regarding this. It's been alleged that BLTF was most likely supported by Indian intelligence agencies. We can't confirm this. We haven't got enough evidence to confirm this. Of course, even if it was true, government would never acknowledge it, as it would have been part of a covert operation to target NDFP. This is an allegation. There are these strong allegations that exist that Indian intelligence agencies, which were trying to target NDFB, they deliberately propped a rival group. That is, we funded and armed few other Bodos to take up insurgency to demand statehood, because this wouldn't threaten India's integrity and sovereignty. And we could use the group to target NDFB, which had become a notorious terrorist organization with links in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Given the threat posed by NDFB, given its Pakistani connections, it is reported that Indian intelligence agencies ran a covert operation by arming BLTF and even BTF. We can't confirm this. I'm just telling you this for your knowledge, right? So there are these strong allegations that India itself might have propped these rival groups so that they can target each other and weaken NDFB, which had become a major threat for India. Is that clear? It remains an allegation. It has not been proven. We don't have enough evidence to verify whether it's true or not. So this violence continued for a few years. Then later, by 2003, India decided that we had to stabilize the situation or else things could get out of hand. When you have three armed groups, engaging in violence with each other, when they had access to weapons, right, things could go easily wrong, and it could further destabilize Assam and the whole of Northeast India. Because imagine, in 1990s, we had multiple other insurgencies going on, right? Almost across Northeast India, multiple insurgencies were raging. So India reached out to BLTF, and we started negotiations with BLTF for a second Bodo Accord. To bring this armed movement to an end, we negotiated with BLTF, the Hindu-dominated group, which was fighting for statehood. And we struck the second Bodo peace accord in 2003. But India did not provide statehood. Separate state would not be possible to be created, right? Because this would again encourage such tendencies. So instead, the limited autonomy which was provided earlier, the limited autonomy which was given in 1993 through the first Bodo Accord, was changed. It was transformed into constitutional autonomy. Essentially, the Autonomous Council was given constitutional protection under the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Please write this down. It's a very, very important point. This is how the Bodoland Territorial Council was created. The Bodoland Autonomous Council that existed before, which was established in 1993 with limited autonomous powers, this was transformed and it was given complete autonomy under the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. So Bodoland Territorial Council was established to administer these Bodo districts. And accordingly, the BLTF surrendered. The BLTF was satisfied with the arrangement provided by the government, the flexibility shown by the government. Now that constitutional autonomy had been given with constitutional protection under 6th schedule, the BLTF accepted the deal, signed the accord in 2003, and surrendered its weapons to the government forces. So BLTF ceased to exist after 2003. So essentially, the political groups had given up their political movement in 93 itself. Now one armed group, the BLTF, also had surrendered and ended its insurgency. The only other group that remained was NDFP. Is that clear? This group continued its war until 2009. Because in 2009, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina ensured that all Northeast insurgents would be targeted and Bangladesh decided not to provide any space for anti-India terror groups. Thanks to the Awami League government, the terror base that existed in Bangladesh was wiped out, and India-Bangladesh started collaborating with regard to security and defense. Border security was improved to check infiltration. Several measures were taken, including intelligence sharing, intelligence cooperation, and even some joint operations to target these insurgent camps located across the border in Bangladesh. The supply of funds and weapons were cut off, and the top leaders were arrested by Bangladesh. India really wanted Ranjan Daimari in its custody, and Bangladesh delivered him to India. Ranjan Daimari and the other top leaders of NDFB, they were all arrested in Bangladesh. There were few factions of NDFB as well. There were few breakaway factions formed by other leaders, which were also sheltered in Bangladesh. So all these NDFB units were broken down by Bangladesh. The leaders were arrested, including Ranjan Daimari, the founder, and they were all handed over to India. Is that clear? So with this, we started the negotiations for a final Bodo Accord to end Bodo insurgency permanently. So from 2010-2011 onwards, the talks went on, and finally in January 2023, that is roughly 4 years back, right? The third Bodo Peace Accord was signed, and this was a landmark achievement. Because after many, many years, a peace accord was being signed in Northeast India. The last major peace accord was with Mizo National Front in 1980s. In 1980s, 1990s, we had ended Mizo insurgency and Tripura insurgency. So after that, the first major insurgency that we brought to an end officially was the Bodo insurgency. It came to an end in 2020, and all the NDFB factions signed this deal along with other Bodo groups as well. The Bodo Students Union and the Bodo political groups, even they were included in the final rounds of negotiations, and all these parties representing the Bodo community are signatories to the peace agreement. It's officially called the Comprehensive Bodo Settlement Agreement, or you can also refer to it as the Third Bodo Peace Accord. Now you should be aware of some of the key provisions of the accord because it's a new deal and there can be a mains question on this topic. Till date, UPSC has not asked a question on the Third Bodo Accord, even though it's been 4 years. But there is every possibility that UPSC might revisit this topic and there can be a possible mains question on the provisions of the deal. So let's take a quick look at the important provisions of the Third Bodo Accord. Let's go through this one by one. So first point that you will have to mention is that all Bodo representatives are party to this agreement, be it the Bodo political groups, the Bodo Students Union, and all factions of NDFB. All these entities representing the Bodo community, they have signed the deal with Government of India and Government of Assam. So this officially ends the Bodo armed insurgency against India. It does not exist anymore. Is that clear? As NDFB has surrendered completely, all factions, there is no breakaway faction which is still active. All right, unlike NSCN and ULFA, all factions of NDFB have surrendered, thus officially ending the Bodo insurgent war against India. So that is the first major point that you have to mention. Mention that all the factions have signed the suspension of operations agreement. They have laid down their arms and weapons and completely surrendered. So in return for this, the government has agreed for a new model of power sharing, a new model of governance that promises more autonomy to the Bodo region. Is that clear? Under the 6th schedule itself, because constitutional autonomy was given in 2003 itself. Now these autonomous powers, right, they have been further expanded to meet the demands of the Bodos, to satisfy the Bodo concerns. So let us see what changes are taking place because of this. Let's understand this one by one. First of all, the Bodos had a complaint that even though Bodoland Territorial Council had been set up and constitutional autonomy had been given, it was still financially dependent on the state government. Remember, I discussed this yesterday as well. I pointed out one of the shortcomings of the sixth schedule. One of the major shortcomings is that even though a lot of autonomy has been given, the states can still interfere because states still control the flow of funds to the autonomous councils. So states often misuse this leverage to influence the functioning of the autonomous councils, thereby eroding the value of the autonomy. What's the point of giving autonomy if the state is interfering constantly, right? This became a leverage for the state government because the autonomous councils were dependent, financially dependent on the state. So this was one concern of the Bodos, that financial dependency has to end. They should not be so dependent on the government of Assam. So to satisfy this demand, the government of India has allocated special funds to be provided directly to the autonomous council. The center has committed a financial package, which I will discuss later. The center has announced a variety of schemes, development initiatives, and dedicated funds for bringing development to the Bodo areas, and these funds will be administered by the autonomous council. The center will directly provide this financial package to the autonomous council by bypassing the state government. So this is one important concession made by the center. Next, the autonomous territory, the area, is being expanded and redrawn. The area which is governed by the autonomous council, the autonomous district, this area is undergoing an expansion and the very boundary lines are being redrawn. Now let me explain this in slight detail. You need to understand why the alteration of the area is being done. Is that clear? So let us go back to the map. Let us go back to the map so you can easily visualize this and understand this point. See, in this map, I already pointed out the 4 Bodo districts: Kokrajhar, Chirang, Udalguri, and Baksa. Now, previously, Bodoland Territorial Council, which was established in 2003, right? This is the governing authority, like your central government, state government, etc. BTC is the governing authority. And what area does it govern? It governed the Bodoland Territorial Region. Sorry, it governed the Bodoland Territorial Autonomous District, BTAD. This autonomous area, the autonomous region, it was called as BTAD. I'll repeat this point. These Bodo areas, they got constitutional autonomy in 2003. The governing authority here is the BTC, right? The autonomous authority here is the BTC, Bodoland Territorial Council, which is like the government of this region. This authority governs over an area, autonomous area, which is called BTAD, Bodoland Territorial Autonomous Districts. Now, this autonomous region included both Bodo villages and as well as a few non-Bodo villages. Now, this was a problem for the Bodo community because according to the Bodos, there were few Bodo villages that were present outside the autonomous district, outside BTAD. So what does it mean? It meant that some of the Bodo villages present outside of this autonomous region, they will not enjoy the benefits of autonomy because BTC will not have authority to govern over these Bodo villages present outside of BTAD. Now, this blue boundary line I have drawn, this is BTAD, this area. This is the autonomous region. All right. But outside of this autonomous district, there have been few Bodo villages present. there have been few Bodo villages outside of the autonomous area. So obviously what will happen? The Bodos who are residing in some of these villages, usually these are hilly areas as well, right? So they dwell in the hill areas, which makes it all the more difficult for them with regard to development and connectivity. So these Bodo villages present outside the autonomous region, outside BTAD, they were left out from the benefits of autonomy. Because BTC cannot govern those areas, it will not have administrative authority and autonomous powers over these Bodo villages. At the same time, I mentioned that few non-Bodo villages had been included within BTAD, that is within the autonomous region. Some non-Bodo villages were present, where Assamese, the tea plantation workers, and some Bengali community members would be present, right? So what happens because of this? Non-Bodos will enjoy the benefits of autonomy. Is that clear? The Bodo villages outside the autonomous region, they get no benefits. These Bodos will not enjoy autonomy at all. But the non-Bodo villages present within the autonomous district, they get to enjoy the benefits of autonomy as well. These were the two problems that the Bodos had, two major concerns. So that is why they wanted the autonomous region to be redrawn, the map to be slightly redrawn. Right? Their demand was to redraw the boundaries so that they can exclude non-Bodo villages, present within BTAD, and at the same time include Bodo villages present outside BTAD. So this is the demand being fulfilled by the third Bodo Accord. So to carry out this redrawing exercise, to determine which non-Bodo village to be excluded, which Bodo village to be included, a committee has been constituted under the third Bodo Accord. A committee has been established. It includes Bodo members, representatives of Government of India and Government of Assam. All the three stakeholders have representation in this committee, and this committee has decided as to which villages have to be excluded and which have to be included. So basically the area, the geographical area of the autonomous region is being redrawn. So the area is going to expand slightly. So that is why the BTAD has been renamed as BTR. It's no longer BTAD, Bodoland Territorial Autonomous Districts. This does not exist. It has been renamed as BTR, which is Bodoland Territorial Region. Understood? I'll just summarize this. One concern of Bodos was that within the autonomous region, the BTAD region, there were some non-Bodo villages where non-Bodos were enjoying the benefits of autonomy. There were also some Bodo villages outside of BTAD where BTC had no authority, no autonomy, and those Bodos were left out from the benefits of autonomy. So Bodos wanted an exchange. They wanted to exclude these non-Bodo villages from the autonomous region and include the Bodo villages into the autonomous region. So this redrawing is being done through a committee which has been set up, and the name of the autonomous region has been changed because of this reason. It's no longer BTAD, it is BTR, Bodoland Territorial Region, which will be administered by the BTC. BTC will be the autonomous authority governing this region called BTR. I think now you would have understood why the alteration was needed and why the redrawing has been done. So please make a note of this. The autonomous region has been renamed because of the redrawing exercise. Is that clear? Next, another important demand of the Bodos was that they wanted to have a say in the appointment of top government officials to these Bodo districts. Now, who are the top officials in any district? We've already studied this. The DC or DM, the deputy commissioner, district collector, or deputy or district magistrate, who's an IAS officer who heads the district administration. The superintendent of police, the SP, who heads the district police, who's an IPS officer, etc. Now, these officers are all state cadre officers, correct? They belong to the respective state cadre and they're appointed, they're transferred by the concerned state government. This is the authority of the state. State need not consult anyone. The state government, which is in power, will decide as to which IAS will be posted as a DC or DM of which district, which IPS officer will be posted as the SP of which district. So this power is entirely with the state. But in the autonomous region, in these 4 districts, the Bodos had a demand that they should be consulted in the appointment process. Meaning the state government should talk to the BTC before appointing the deputy commissioners and the SPs of these 4 districts. So this demand has been fulfilled by the 3rd Bodo Accord. Since these officials play a critical role in district administration and grassroots administration, the Bodos wanted to have a say in the appointment process. Is that clear? So now the state government cannot appoint anyone it wants. It has to consult the BTC, the autonomous authority, and arrive at a consensus as to which IAS and IPS officers can be appointed as the DC and the SP of these 4 autonomous districts. That's another very big change which has been done. Next, a Bodo Kachari Welfare Council has been set up to look after the welfare of Bodo villages that were outside BTAD. Because these Bodo villages that were outside BTAD have got no benefits of the autonomy that was given previously. Right? They have been left behind. They haven't enjoyed the benefits of autonomy as they were present outside of the autonomous district. So to look after their welfare and provide for special developmental initiatives for these Bodo villages, which are now being included in BTR, a separate welfare council has been set up, the Bodo Kachari Welfare Council. Is that clear? Please understand why it was needed. It was necessary because these Bodo villages outside BTAD, they had not enjoyed autonomy from the last 20-30 years. Whereas the other Bodo districts, they've had limited autonomy from 93 itself, then constitutional autonomy from 2003. So they have seen some development and social upliftment. So to provide the same degree of development to these Bodo villages which weren't under the autonomous area, a special welfare council has been created to look after the welfare of the Bodo Kachari community. Next, Bodos who are living in the hill areas in these autonomous regions, they are being recognized as a scheduled tribe. ST status is being provided to them. So as a result, these tribal lands will be protected. No one else can purchase tribal land. Once a community gets tribal status, right, the land gets automatically protected. So this tribal land, only in the hills, not for everyone, not for all the Bodos. Only those Bodos who reside in the hill areas of the autonomous region, only they enjoy the ST status. They have been recognized as scheduled hill tribe, and as a result, their land gets protection. Plus, they will enjoy various other government benefits, including reservation, government subsidies, concessions, etc. The Bodo language, which had been previously ignored and neglected by the state government, has been given better recognition through the accord by recognizing it as an associate official language for the entire state. This unique language, it represents a linguistic cultural identity of the Bodos, right? For many decades, they were demanding for equal status for Bodo language. But government of Assam never gave it equal treatment. It was enforcing the Assamese language on Bodos. In fact, similar complaint has persisted with Nagas and Mizos as well, which at one point was part of the large state of Assam. So the Bodos felt discriminated, that their language was not respected. It wasn't given equal treatment. And upon that, the state government was enforcing Assamese on them. So through the accord, Bodo language has been recognized as an associate official language, not just for Bodo areas, but for the whole state of Assam. So more than 1,500 militants have surrendered, and they are going to be rehabilitated and assimilated back into mainstream. The government will not target them. Many of them will not even be arrested. Is that clear? The government is going to lift the cases, the criminal cases, whatever cases are registered against these militants, they will be revoked by the government, will not pursue those cases, and they'll be let free as part of the peace process. All right? But however, please remember, this does not mean that we are going to pardon those who have committed heinous crimes. This pardon is available only to those insurgents who are not involved in any heinous crimes. Only if they have been charged with non-heinous crimes, they are going to be pardoned and the cases will be withdrawn. But if they have been involved in acts of terrorism, in rapes, murders, and such brutal violence, right? These are heinous offenses. So these insurgents will not be spared. The cases will continue and they will be punished. Understood? So those who are directly involved in acts of terrorism, those who have engaged in brutal violence, they are not going to be spared and the cases will continue and they will be punished. Only those charged with non-heinous crimes, they will be pardoned by the state and cases have already been withdrawn. This allows them to come back into the mainstream and the government is supporting their rehabilitation. We are helping them with jobs, houses, and even some funds as a compensation to encourage them to come back into mainstream. All right, so a rehabilitation package is being provided. These surrendered militants who are pardoned, they will get compensation from the state. A certain amount of money is given to them. They will be getting some help to get jobs or even to get a housing facility to settle those families. But however, the citizenship or work permit issue of the outsiders, the non-Bodos, is not decided here. That is, be it illegal migrants or be it the tea plantation workers who are from central India. So their domicile status, their resident status, the citizenship issues, they have not been touched by the deal because that's a larger sensitive issue that has been left aside. Whereas the government has provided a lot of incentives have been provided to convince the Bodos to end the insurgency and to promise better development for the region. All right, let us see what kind of incentives are being given. Compensation of 5 lakh rupees each to every militant. Is that clear? That is the compensation I was mentioning. A special development package of 1,500 crores, which the center will directly provide to BTC over few years. The BTC can use the funds for development and welfare of Bodo areas. This reduces the financial dependency of the autonomous council on the state government. It need not beg the state government for funds. It will protect the autonomous council from any state interference and political interference. Then the government has promised to improve critical infrastructure and public infrastructure, to create better roads, railway connectivity, establish bridges and tunnels. This will serve a strategic purpose as well, because some of these areas are located very close to international borders. So India is committing itself to step up the critical infrastructure and a number of educational institutions are going to be set up by the central government. The center has promised to establish a central university, a national sports university to promote sports related education, and aims like institutions and NIT, aims like medical institutions for promoting medical education, medical research, and even healthcare facilities, and NIT, National Institute of Technology. These elite educational institutions will be set up to provide educational and employment opportunities and also to drive tourism into the region. The Bodo region is extremely beautiful. It has great tourist potential. So if hundreds and thousands of students come in to these central institutions from outside of Bodo areas, from other parts of India, obviously their families, their friends would like to visit as well. That will drive up domestic tourism, which will bring revenue and create jobs for the Bodo community. So these are the various promises made by the government under the Third Bodo Accord, which has formally ended the Bodo conflict against India. Is that clear? So kindly remember these key points that I've discussed. There can be a 15 marks question. UPSC might ask you, discuss the background related to Bodo insurgency and the provisions, right? Critically analyze the provisions of the Third Bodo Accord. So discuss all the provisions, mention how it has helped in ending Bodo insurgency permanently. But one shortcoming is that, one concern, one fear is that, has the government given too many concessions? I think even you would have gotten that sense, that feeling when I was discussing the points, right? I went on and on. At least I discussed some 8 to 10 points. It clearly shows government has given a lot of concession. The government has agreed to a lot. So obviously the question comes up that was this the right thing to do? Because if you are giving so many concessions, what message are we sending to other armed insurgent groups? It might set a wrong example, a wrong precedent. The other groups might presume that so many concessions have been given to Bodos just because NDFB was more violent, because it was more brutal. If that is the perception which gets created because of this, then other insurgents in other states, they will deliberately engage in more violence, because tomorrow they will know that when the government will negotiate with them, government will give them more concessions. Because look at what the government has announced. It's agreed for redrawing the boundaries. It has given the authority, the autonomous authority, a say in the appointment of the district officials, right? Which is never done in other district. In any district in the country, state government will have full authority to appoint the officials. This is the first time autonomous authority is also included in the appointment process. Look at the funds given, 1,500 crores, 5 lakhs in compensation, all cases withdrawn, right? And a lot of developmental projects, central institutions. So these are a lot of concessions. Scheduled hill tribe status, protection for tribal land, a special welfare council for Bodo Kacharis. All the concessions have been given. All the demands have been met. So other groups might take the wrong lesson from this. They might presume that, see, NDFB was very violent. They were committing brutal attacks. That is why government has given them so many concessions. So tomorrow, other groups will be motivated to replicate this model. Right? Across Northeast India, including in Assam, there is a concern that this might set a wrong example, because it appears that the government has given a lot to a insurgent movement. Right? So that is one drawback or one concern that you can highlight if the question is asking you to critically analyze. So this completes my discussion on Assam. As I told you, it's a very big topic. It's a detailed discussion. We have covered all the major insurgencies in Assam. So now if you have any doubts, any questions, please let me know. I'll take them up. And now we are headed towards the last part of the chapter. We are left with just few small topics. One is Manipur. It will take some time because of the recent developments. We'll discuss that in detail. And we'll quickly talk about Mizoram and Tripura. And I'm going to close this chapter by talking about the approach that India has taken in general to tackle insurgency in Northeast India. So these are the last 4 topics. Now, before I take this up, let me know if you have questions and doubts. Kanchana says, no wonder NDFB were a Christian outfit. That's why they wanted to be part of India. Oh, she has clarified. No, NDFB never wanted to be part of India. They wanted to break these areas away from India. Nikhil says, Sheikh Hasina is like a God-given gift for India in a hostile neighborhood. Absolutely. I agree with you. Sheikh Hasina has been a phenomenal personality in South Asia. Just like her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, she has been a great friend of India, a friend whom we can trust, right? Our ties with Bangladesh has transformed only because of Awami League and Sheikh Hasina's leadership. That is why the recent Bangladeshi elections were critical. Before the elections that was held last week, there was a lot of turmoil, violence in Bangladesh. Opposition parties had boycotted the election. China, US were interfering, trying to meddle with the Bangladeshi elections, right? But Sheikh Hasina clearly won the mandate because all opposition parties had boycotted the election. And the return of Sheikh Hasina is indeed good news for India, right? Because her government has always supported India despite the differences that we have. We do have some issues and differences, but on core issues like security, border management, counterterrorism, right? Bangladesh has been a great friend in the last 14 years. Diksha is asking, what about the sentiments of Assamese in the whole process? See, Assamese demands were met through Assam Accord, right? And now the deal has been signed with ULFA. Just few days back, we studied that yesterday. Government has signed a peace deal with ULFA, and it has given some concessions for ULFA and the Assamese as well. So this was about Bodo insurgency to satisfy the demands of Bodos, right? So both concerns have been taken care of by the government to the extent possible. Abhishek is asking, sir, is the Autonomous Council's recommendation binding on the state government while appointing SP and DC? No, that's not the case. It's not that BTC will dictate the appointment. No, it only has a consultation representation provided in the appointment process. Final decision is with the state government, right? BTC can suggest, let's say state government comes up with the names of two officials. BTC can pick one of them, or BTC can reject that. It can deny or it can counter that these officials are not good for us, try to appoint someone else. It only can give opinion. It can't decide as to who will be the DC and DSP. The final decision is left to the state government. The state government will retain that authority. But the mandatory provision is that state has to consult BTC. It has to get the opinion of BTC, whether they're okay with it or not. If they're not okay, if they're not happy with the appointment, state will consider, right? But it's not mandatory. State can still go ahead and make the appointment. Gia is asking, sir, Bodo Autonomous Council of second and third Bodo Accord are the same? The Autonomous Council is the same. Yes, it's under the 6th schedule of the Constitution. It's exactly the same. All right. So guys, these are the questions. Now, let's head towards the next topic. Very important topic. Let's look at Manipur. Previously, I would finish this topic hardly in 10 to 15 minutes because it's an old topic. Manipur's insurgency is something that is a little outdated. But however, last year has changed everything. The last 8 to 10 months has changed everything in Manipur. And right now, it's the most burning, pressing issue in the country. It's unfortunate that the government hasn't paid enough attention to the issue, right? Because Manipur is quite literally burning. Brutal atrocities have been committed here. It's not about who has done what. It's not about which side to be blamed. At the end, humanity suffers when such brutal violence is allowed to happen, right? It's quite unthinkable that such incidents are allowed to happen in a major country like India. The situation is extremely alarming. Some of you might realize this because you would be reading newspapers, you would be watching the the news updates coming from here. But those who are not aware, please understand that this, honestly, according to me, is the most pressing security challenge of this year. If the government fails to address this, if the government doesn't deal with the issue in a fair and transparent manner and punish all the culprits, irrespective of who they are, whom they belong to, right? India is going to pay a very big price for this because the developments are so deadly, so dangerous, right? And especially given what's happening in Myanmar, things can go very wrong in Manipur. For many decades, Manipur had become stable. The insurgency had ended. The violence had come down. The return of these divisions and large scale violence is an extremely dangerous threat for the very security of the nation. So let's understand what the problem in Manipur is all about. Let's look at the history, the background, right? What happened in 1960s and 70s and what is the current problem. See, Manipur was a princely state. It was the Manipuri kingdom. Is that clear? From several centuries, it had been an independent kingdom, the Manipuri kingdom, ruled by the Meitei rulers. The Meiteis were part of the ruling dynasty. Who are the Meiteis? The Meiteis are a distinct ethnic group which is the most dominant majority group in Manipur. Is that clear? Please get this point right. There are Meitei Hindus. Majority of Meiteis are Hindus. There are few Meitei Muslims as well. All right? But this is more of an ethnic identity, more than a religious identity. So Meiteis, right? They were part of the royal dynasty. It was the Meitei rulers who ruled the Meitei kingdom, the Manipuri kingdom. And even today, Meiteis are dominant and they are the majority community. It means they are in large numbers. If you just take the population size of different ethnic groups and tribal groups in Manipur, the largest community, the largest ethnic group in terms of population happen to be the Meiteis. And also, they are the most dominant. They are politically, economically influential, right? Because they were part of the ruling dynasty and they've held on to the power centers. They have access to the government. Many Meitei members are part of the government itself, right? So they have a very high degree of political economic influence, which makes them the dominant group. Now, the Meiteis today, they are primarily concentrated in the Imphal Valley. Is that clear? Majority of the Meiteis, almost 90% of them, are found in the Imphal Valley region. Imphal is the capital, right? This is the plain area, the valley area. This is where you find the Meitei community to be concentrated. Now, this independent kingdom came under British rule, British influence, as the British defeated the Meitei kingdom. There was a brief conflict back in the 1800s, in the late 1800s, right? So the Meitei kingdom was defeated by the British forces, but the British were smart enough to not occupy the kingdom because they were not interested in territorial control. They had realized that Northeast India could become a challenge for them because across India, they were already finding it very difficult to administer India and control India, right? But the freedom struggle had already broken out. The British were shrewd enough to understand that it's better not to mess with indigenous tribes and ethnic groups because they're harder to control and they might fight back, right? Because they resist outsiders, they resist interference. And if they feel threatened, they are going to react violently. So, realizing this, the British never exercised territorial control. They never sought the annexation of the kingdom. What they did was they struck a deal. They struck a deal because all they cared about was economic interests. They just wanted to economically exploit the forests and the resources of Northeast India. As long as they had access to that, they didn't bother about who ruled the region, who looked after administration. They didn't care about it. So they struck a deal with the Meitei rulers and gave them a sense of autonomy. They said, you are autonomous. They said you can govern yourselves. We will not interfere in your politics, in your administration. You are all powerful in your administration. But give us loyalty, be loyal to the British colonial enterprise, and give us economic access. This was the deal struck by the British. Is that clear? So essentially, it would be under the sovereignty of British India. But politically, administratively, the Meitei rulers still had their autonomy, meaning they would still be the rulers, their titles will not be taken away, their property, their authority will not be taken away. They will administer the kingdom, they will be the authority in power, right? The monarchy will continue, but the kingdom will always be loyal to British India. And it will provide economic access to the forest resources of Manipur. Now, this led the Meitei rulers to believe that they were kind of independent. They presumed that they were always independent. This was not true independence. This was just limited autonomy, a sense of satisfaction that was given by the British because they were concentrating on economic exploitation. Right? They didn't care about who ruled the region, who administered it. They never wanted to get into those areas. Right? So, over a period of time, the Meitei kings, they started feeling that their independence was never compromised by British India. They felt that their kingdom was always independent, autonomous. So, as a result, when India gained independence, when the Indian Union was being formed, the princely state, the Meitei kings, they resisted the merger with India. See, today, Meiteis deny this, but that is a fact. The then Meitei Hindu kings, they did not want to join India. Why? Because of two reasons. One, they didn't want to give up their authority, their wealth, their titles and resources. It was the same concern every monarch had in the country, in every princely state. Next, they felt that Meiteis and other groups in Manipuri kingdom, they didn't have much of a common connection with rest of India. Just like other ethnic groups and tribal groups were asking for independence, even the Meiteis and the people of Manipur believed that Manipur should have been independent from India. In fact, Manipur did not formally accede to the Indian Union until 1949. It required a lot of negotiations, incentives, and even pressure and threats from the Indian government to push the Meitei kings to sign the instrument of accession and then merge Manipur into the Indian Union. Is that clear? So this was considered as a forceful merger by the Meiteis. Especially the Meitei rulers, right, and those who were close to the monarchy, they perceived this as a forceful merger with India. Obviously, India couldn't agree to such demands. If we start granting independence to all the princely states, we had more than 600 princely states. All of them would have broken away from India. Indian Union would have never been formed, right? So India was very clear that we will not allow any area to break away. India ensured that Manipur integrated into the Indian Union, but this left a sense that Manipur was forced to join India, forcefully it was merged into India. So this had created a sense of resentment. Amongst the majority Meiteis, a sense of resentment had built by 1949, 1950 itself. All right? But this was not the primary cause for insurgency. It was one of the factors. It was one of the causes. All right? But later, post-independence, there were few developments in 1950s and 1960s which led to the triggering of an insurgent movement. Now, what happened after independence? India provided ST status to the hill tribes of Manipur. Which are these hill tribes? One are the Nagas, the subgroups and clans of Nagas. We studied this yesterday as well. Then the other would be the Kukis. Where are they found? They are found in the hills present outside of Imphal Valley, around the Imphal Valley. And the hills are closer to the border with Myanmar, especially the Kuki Hills. They are right along the Myanmar border. Whereas the Naga Hills, they border Nagaland. So many experts, the many strategic experts and many top analysts, they compare the geography of Manipur to that of a stadium. They call Manipur a football stadium or a cricket stadium because Manipur's geography is almost exactly like that. Now, how does a stadium look? A stadium basically has a center field, which is the playing area, which is the low-lying area, and there are stands that rise around the playing area where the spectators are seated, correct? So that everyone gets a clear view. Manipur's geography is something like that. In the middle, you have the Imphal Valley, where Metis are found. And around the Imphal Valley, you have the hills. This is where you find Kukis towards the Myanmar border. This is where you find the Nagas towards the northern border, towards Nagaland. Is that clear? So that's why Manipur is often compared with a stadium. So in the center, you have the Imphal Valley, which is dominated by Metis. Metis are mainly concentrated in the valley. In the hills, you find Nagas to the north and the Kukis to the east towards Myanmar. Now, why is this important? This is extremely important and I'll explain that. Now, Metis already had a resentment against India that they lost their independence, their autonomy, their authority, their wealth, their status, everything was lost when they were merged with India. They felt it was a forceful merger, so there was a sense of resentment amongst the Metis. Now, later, a few years later, when India recognized the scheduled tribes and gave ST status, the hill tribe status, to Nagas and Kukis, this triggered the Metis. This became the immediate trigger because once they get the tribal status, what happens? Their land becomes protected. So please understand the dynamics. Now, because of the tribal status, Metis who are from the valley, they cannot go to the hill areas and purchase tribal land. They cannot touch Kuki land and the Naga land that is present in the hill tracts of Manipur. Is that clear? That is completely protected. But however, the hill tribes can come down to the valley. They can purchase Methi land and settle in the valley. Understood? Nagas and Kukis of Manipur, they can come to Imphal Valley. They can settle down and buy property as well, which belongs to Metis. So Methi land can be bought. But Metis can't go to Kuki areas and Naga areas and purchase tribal land in the hills. So this became a fight about land and obviously culture and identity. This is what the fight is about in Manipur. It is essentially an ethnic conflict. It's a result of inter-ethnic rivalry between the majority group and the minority groups. All right. Now, because of tribal status, Nagas and Kukis also enjoy government benefits and privileges, from reservation to government subsidies to government concessions. They will get all the benefits as well, which is denied to Metis. Right? See, please understand the policy of reservation is meant for a reason. It's meant to protect weaker groups and minority groups and vulnerable groups. Why will majority groups be given scheduled tribe status and government benefits and privileges? Right? It's like general category demanding all the privileges, just like as it is given to the reserved category. That defeats the very purpose of reservation. Reservation is a tool. It's a tool of affirmative action to uplift the vulnerable sections, the downtrodden sections, to bring them on par with the upward sections, right? So obviously, this demand or the status was never given to Metis. They are in majority, they are dominant, right? It was never given to Metis. It was accorded to Nagas and Kukis in Manipur. So their land got protected. They got government benefits and privileges. They could also go to Imphal and purchase Metis land. Now the Metis got triggered. In 1960s, the Metis felt threatened. And let me be very fair, very unbiased here. I know it's a very sensitive, controversial topic. The Metis are not to be blamed entirely as well. Of course, some of their demands have been unreasonable, right? But Metis alone don't take the blame for what has happened in Manipur. The Kukis and Nagas, they had started their parallel armed insurgent movements. Is that clear? See, by 1960s, by 1960s, Naga insurgency was already raging in Assam. That's in today's Nagaland. Correct? 1947 itself, Naga National Council had declared an insurgent war. And these Naga insurgents, they were connected to the Nagas in Manipur. They were giving support to them. So basically, the Nagas of Manipur had armed support from the Naga insurgent groups operating in the Nagaland. The Kukis had started their own armed movement for Kuki land. Now here I'll mention a very important point. The Kukis have a connection across the border. In Myanmar, the Kukis have a related community, a related ethnic tribe called the Zomi community. These are different subgroups and clans of the same tribe. Kukis, Zomi community, they belong to the same ethnic tribe. They are just divided by a border, right? They are connected to each other. Culturally, they are the same. They have familial connections as well. So they are related and connected with each other. Now, the Zomi community in Myanmar, they had already started an armed movement against Myanmar's government to fight for their independence. Myanmar also is affected by many such insurgencies. All right, even that is a ethnic tribal society. So many minority groups, tribal groups, and ethnic groups have started their own insurgencies fighting against Myanmar government and against the army, and they are trying to basically create their own separate country. So the Zomi community in Myanmar had started an armed movement, and the Kukis from Manipur joined them. They were fighting for a Kuki land, a land for the Kukis. This was essentially a separatist movement, right? They were wanted independence. So essentially, Nagas and Kukis had their armed groups to back them. The Nagas in Manipur hills had support from Naga insurgents. Kukis from Kuki area, the Kuki hill area, they had the backing of the Kuki land armed groups, which were connected with Zomi community in Myanmar. All right. So as these armed movements broke out by the minority tribes, the Metis perceived this as an existential threat. First of all, they had resented the merger with India. They already had a grievance there, right? They were frustrated that they were forced to join India, right? They had lost their authority, their wealth, and their titles, etc. Plus, ST status was given to the hill tribes, which angered the Metis. They felt that now their land will be threatened, and they were disappointed that they couldn't buy the land in Naga and Kuki hills. Upon that, Naga and Kuki communities here, they had connections with armed groups which were backing them. Now, this was seen as an existential threat by the Metis. So this rivalry, resentment between the groups triggered clashes between these communities. The clashes obviously were violent, and as Nagas and Kukis stepped up their counterattacks, some of the radicalized Metis, they started their own armed insurgent organizations. The Metis, right, to counter the Nagas and Kukis, and also to defend themselves against the armed groups of Nagas and Kukis, they founded their own insurgent organizations, thus triggering a widespread insurgency in Manipur in 1960s. All right. So within few years after India's independence, a major security problem began here for India with cross-border implications. So two major Methi insurgent groups were formed. Nagas already had the support of Naga insurgents. Kukis were connected with Kuki armed organizations with support in Myanmar. So very quickly, the situation escalated as these groups started targeting each other. Large-scale violence broke out and targeted attacks started happening. Right? And no community is a saint here. All the armed groups, right, have committed atrocities against each other. Methi insurgents have slaughtered Kukis and Nagas. Kuki armed groups have slaughtered Methis, right? Even Naga armed groups have been involved in targeting Methis and the others. So essentially, this is a massive humanitarian crisis. It's not about who did what. It's not about who's right, whether it's Methis or Kukis or Nagas. Honestly, nobody is right. Right? In such a conflict where brutal atrocities are being committed by the extremists, it's the innocent people who lose out. There are innocent Methis, innocent Kukis, innocent Nagas. They are the ones suffering because of these radical extremists. Is that clear? So you should know which are these armed groups of the Methis. The Methis had established two major armed insurgent outfits. One is UNLF, United National Liberation Front, set up in 1964, and as well as the PLA, People's Liberation Army of Manipur. Both are obviously left-wing extremist organizations, and both were separatist outfits, meaning they wanted to break Manipur away from India, eliminate Kukis and Nagas, and establish an independent country. This was their stated objective. Is that clear? So these two Methi outfits have remained a considerable threat for India for several decades. From 1960s almost till 1990s, during these 3 decades, Manipur was completely destabilized because of this large-scale violence. Is that clear? On one hand, the Kuki groups were a threat. The Naga groups were already a threat, which we have studied. And now the Methi groups became a equally bigger threat. So UNLF and PLA emerged as major Methi insurgent groups, and they had a separatist demand. They wanted to break Manipur away, target the minority tribes, and achieve full independence from India. So to counter this large-scale violence, India immediately extended AFSPA into Manipur as well. It became a necessity because these insurgents very quickly developed cross-border linkages, right? Because there were so many other groups operating here and the border was always porous. They could cross over the border and get support. They could access drugs, weapons, and funds, right? And this allowed them to sustain the movement against India. So as the violence escalated here in 60s and 70s, India countered it by imposing AFSPA, and Indian Army, along with Assam Rifles, was involved in long-lasting counter-insurgency operations. So after sustained efforts of at least 30 years, we managed to reduce the violence. The violence came down quite significantly post-2000. By 1990s, India had weakened most of these groups. Not just the Methi groups, even the Naga groups and the Kuki outfits. In fact, there was a major operation that Indian Army had carried out across Northeast India. One was Operation Rhino and the other was Operation Bajrang. These are two major counterinsurgency operations that Indian Army carried out across Northeast India, targeting multiple insurgent groups. Through these operations, India had hit these terror camps, their funding, the top leaders, So as a result, violence in Manipur started declining after 2000. Manipur became very stable in the last 2 decades. Violence had declined, but AFSPA was still in place because the situation was never addressed. The resolution was never achieved. The final resolution was never achieved, right? The issue was just pressed under. We weakened the groups, violence was brought down, and thus stability was brought back. But the core issue was never addressed. The inter-ethnic divisions, rivalries, the resentment, the hatred, this was never addressed at the grassroots, and this persisted over the last 2 decades. So last year, these divisions have erupted again. So let's understand what has happened in the last few months. See, the Meiteis have been fighting for ST status from a long time. This has been a long-standing demand of the Meitei community. They believe that to achieve parity with the Kukis and Nagas, who have been given ST status, they believe that even they should be given ST status to protect their land, all right, and to protect their identity. Now, to address the demand, 10 years ago in 2013, the government of India, under the Tribal Affairs Ministry, had set up a committee. It had set up a committee to examine whether the Meiteis deserve the ST status. Should ST status be provided to Meiteis? To answer this question, Tribal Affairs Ministry of Government of India had set up a committee in 2013 and a report had been submitted. And this committee report recommended the ST status. The committee identified that Meiteis have been left behind, even though they are in majority and they are the dominant group. They have been left behind, they have become backward, right? So the committee said there is enough criteria, enough factors to provide ST status to Meiteis. Now, this recommendation was not accepted or denied by the Government of India. Government of India and the state government, they were simply sitting on this recommendation. All right. So few Meitei groups which wanted this recommendation to be implemented, they approached the Manipur High Court. They filed a case at the Manipur High Court seeking the implementation of this committee's recommendation, which had called for ST status for Meiteis. So this was obviously opposed by Kukis from a long time. But last year, what happened? In April, May 2023, Manipur High Court delivered a judgment. The Manipur High Court directed the state government to work towards implementing ST status for Meiteis. Is that clear? It's not that the court gave a deadline and made it mandatory. It ordered the state to work towards it, to work towards implementing it. So doesn't mean it would have happened immediately. It might have taken some time. It may not have happened. It might have been delayed. But the Manipur High Court passed this ruling. It ruled that the committee has found enough criteria to identify that Meiteis are backward as well. So ST status has been recommended. Now, why don't you work on it? Why don't you implement this? This was the order given by the Manipur High Court. As soon as the order came out, Kuki outfits, which felt immediately threatened, they declared protests against this. They declared a mass protest. Now, this was still fine. Kukis will have every right to protest in a democratic country. As long as the protests are peaceful, you have every right to protest on any issue, right? But as the Kuki protest started, the Meitei armed groups, which had revived themselves, they started targeting the Kukis in Imphal and also in the hill areas. And the Kuki armed groups were no less. The Kuki armed groups also retaliated, targeting Meiteis in the region. This is how the large-scale violence broke out. The latest violence is between Meiteis and Kukis. Nagas are not involved. Previously, Nagas had created issues for Meiteis and they had issues with each other. But the current issue, which we are seeing in the last few months, this is primarily between the Meiteis and the Kukis. As soon as the Kukis called for a protest and took out a rally, the protests were targeted by Meitei armed groups where large-scale killings were committed, including rapes, brutal torture, and murder in Imphal. The state government, the state police, they completely failed to prevent this from happening. There are allegations that the state government is acting in a biased manner. Kuki armed groups also retaliated with counter-violence targeting Meitei houses and Meitei businesses, right? And this is what blew the situation out of proportion. So several people have been killed and slaughtered, right? And large-scale violence and counterattacks have broken out, and it continues even today. The issue has still not been addressed. It continues even till date. Is that clear? Now, the Meiteis have an allegation which is supported by the state government as well, that Kukis, especially the Kuki Zo or the Kuki Zomi community, they have become a threat to Manipur, according to Meiteis and the state government. Because as the crisis in Myanmar has erupted since 2021, right, Myanmar's military, it nullified the elections throughout the elected government and democracy, and it has restored military dictatorship. Since then, the political opposition and all the insurgent groups have united to launch a war against Myanmar's military, to throw the military out and to establish democracy in the country. So this has led to a civil war in Myanmar, and there has been a large-scale flow of refugees into the border states, especially Manipur and Mizoram. They have received a considerable influx of refugees. And one community which has flowed into India happens to be the Zomi community, which is from Myanmar. Since they have been threatened by the Myanmar army, they have crossed the border and sought shelter in Manipur because they have the protection of the Kukis, because Kukis are connected to them. They are related to them. In fact, many Kuki Zomi families are married to each other. So you have the Kuki Zomi community as well. So as these refugees entered Manipur, they have been settled by the Kukis in the hill areas. The refugees have settled in the Kuki hills. And there is an allegation by Meiteis and the state government that they are deforesting the region. They are clearing the forest to create refugee settlements and using the cleared area for drug cultivation. This is what the state government has alleged and the Meiteis have alleged. That Kuki Zo community is a threat. Zomi members who have come to Manipur as refugees, they are being settled illegally in the hills of Manipur, in the Kuki hills, and they are cutting down the forest, clearing forest land to settle the refugees, and also growing drugs as part of their illegal criminal business. This allegation led the state government to revoke the suspension of operations agreement that it had signed earlier with Kuki armed groups. This was even before the High Court judgment came in. Before the Manipur High Court ruled in favor of ST status for Meiteis, before that, the state government had revoked the suspension of operations agreement, the ceasefire agreement that the government had signed with Kuki armed groups, which meant the ceasefire had been lifted, which meant that Manipur police could possibly target the Kuki armed groups. And in fact, such targeted operations had already begun against the alleged drug cultivation by Kuki-Zo community in the hills. So now the Kukis felt threatened that the state government, which is dominated by Meiteis, will target the Kukis because the ceasefire had been revoked, the suspension of operations agreement had been revoked. Then came the Manipur High Court order directing the state to implement the ST status. Right? So Kukis who felt threatened, they also escalated the violence by targeting the Meiteis, by calling for protests against ST status. Right? And that's exactly the protest which turned violent, where Meitei armed groups first targeted the Kukis, and Kukis retaliated by targeting the Meiteis. So this has created a vicious cycle of violence. Again, it's not about who's right, who's wrong, right? It's created this vicious cycle of violence which has consumed Manipur. And the unfortunate thing is that the state government and even the center have reacted in a very poor manner to contain the crisis. Of course, MHA stepped in immediately by understanding the gravity of the situation. It deployed more units of Assam rifles. It even brought in the Indian Army in certain places, right? Even other central forces like CRPF, and even few units of BSF and ITBP have been mobilized, and large number of troops have been deployed to stabilize Manipur. But however, the kind of violence that has happened in Manipur has created deep wounds amongst the people. You would have seen reports, visuals of brutal killings, rapes, and murders. Right? This has created generational hatred, and it will not go away so easily unless and until the state intervenes and reduces the hatred amongst the ethnic groups. So this is where it's very important for the state government especially to show that it is unbiased, to show that it doesn't favor Meiteis or the Kukis. The center should back the state government. There should be an outreach towards all the leaders, the community leaders on both the sides, right? Negotiations have to be held to settle this issue as quickly as possible. Because the longer it continues, the longer it persists, and the longer the wound is left open, it's only going to breed more hatred. And this could turn into something even more dangerous in the coming days, especially given that Myanmar is so unstable right now. Things can easily get out of hand, and it could lead to widespread insurgency again in Manipur. Is that clear? On the other hand, Meiteis have faced issues from Nagas as well, especially the Naga armed groups in Nagaland. They would often block the highway to Manipur. It's called the Naga blockade. If you look at the map of Northeast India, you will notice that Manipur is locked by Nagaland to the north. All right, and there is one critical national highway that comes from Assam to Nagaland to Manipur. This is the lifeline of Manipur, right? This is what connects Manipur to the rest of the country. So all major goods and supplies comes through this highway from Assam to Nagaland, then from Nagaland to Manipur. But what Naga insurgents do, that is NSCN, we studied yesterday that NSCN acts like a criminal gang. It's involved in criminal activities. These insurgents, they deliberately block the trucks. They block the border crossing point, and they will not allow the trucks to pass through. Either they'll collect ransom, or whenever they want to put pressure on the Meiteis, or if they want to attract the attention of the government of India for the Naga issue, they will block this highway to trigger an economic crisis in Manipur. Right? This creates a shortage of essential items like food, fuel, and medicines, and it leads to massive inflation that affects the common man in Manipur. So Meiteis have strongly opposed the Naga blockade, which has happened quite frequently over the years. That is why Meiteis demanded the implementation of ILP, Inner Line Permit. They wanted Inner Line Permit to be implemented in Manipur. It wasn't there in Manipur before. It was implemented only in Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, etc. All right. So Manipur also wanted Inner Line Permit. It was a primary demand of the Meiteis to protect Meitei land from any kind of outside interference and outside attempt to grab Methi land. So a few years ago, the Manipur Assembly has adopted ILP. It has implemented inner line permit system for Manipur as well, even for the Imphal Valley region. Now, some of you might be wondering, what is ILP? What is inner line permit? Now, this is a small exercise I'll give you, a small homework. This is actually a polity related topic, right? I'll give you a hint as to what it is. Please read about it. See, just like when you travel to another country, let's say I go to United States, US will not simply give me entry, right? I need to have a valid visa, a legal visa stamped on my passport. Only then I'm allowed entry into the US, right? That is how permit systems work. Visa is like a permit. Now, similarly, within our country, there are few places which are protected. To enter those areas, we need permits. Even if you're an Indian, let's say I'm from Karnataka, I want to go to a certain area in Nagaland. If that area is protected under inner line permit system, I cannot enter that region because I'm an outsider. I'm not native to that area protected by ILP. I have to apply. I have to apply to the state government. State government issues the ILP. State government has the authority to issue the inner line permit. I have to obtain this permit, only then I can enter these areas. This is actually a practice started by the British. They had passed the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation Act to restrict the entry of Indians from other parts of the country to Northeast India. They did this because they did not want Indian traders and businessmen to come to Northeast India to harvest the resources of Northeast India. They wanted only British companies to have a monopoly on the Northeastern market and to extract the forest resources of Northeast India. So that is why they had implemented the inner line permit. So Indians from other parts of the country, from Northern India, Southern India, Western India, they could not enter Northeast India because of inner line permit. They have to get the permit from the authorities, only then they could enter. So British had used this to protect their economic interests in the Northeast. We continued this policy after independence, not for economic interests, but to protect the tribes, to protect the ethnic communities, their land and their culture. We continued ILP. It's a British policy. We continued it, not for the same reason, not for economic interests. It was for protecting some of the tribes and ethnic groups and their land and culture from unnecessary outside interference. So if Indians from other parts of the country have to enter ILP areas, they have to obtain the inner line permit issued by the concerned state government. So Manipur did not have ILP. Now, what is the problem for Metis? Their main problem was Nagas and Kukis had ST status. Their land was protected in the hills. In the Imphal Valley, Methi land had no protection. That is why they demanded ILP, so that at least some level of protection can be provided to Methi land as well. Recently, the Manipur Legislative Assembly had adopted, a few years ago, it had adopted the implementation of inner line permit in Manipur as well. Understood? Similarly, read about protected area permit. Read about this as well, given that Lakshadweep is in news, right? Read about protected area permit. Understand what it is. It's very similar to inner line permit, but it serves a different purpose. So read about these two topics. That is a small exercise, a homework I'm giving you. So this is where the situation stands in Manipur as of today. And I have one last update, one last important update from current affairs. Recently in December, Government of India achieved a major breakthrough with UNLF. This Methi-based insurgent group has signed a peace deal with the Government of India. This was before the Ulfa deal, just few days before Ulfa deal. This peace deal was signed between Government of India and UNLF. So United National Liberation Front, which is a Methi outfit, has surrendered, bringing its insurgency to an end. It comes at a crucial time when Manipur is already affected by deep-rooted ethnic violence. So this might help further stabilize Manipur. We don't know the exact terms of the deal because it is still a classified document. It was signed recently. But as you can assume, it provides for the surrender of the group. It will allow the militants to come back to mainstream. And in return, the government will make some concessions. The government will provide some kind of financial and developmental promises, right, which would satisfy some of the demands of the Metis. So the UNLF has signed the deal and it has surrendered. So please make a note of this recent development. All right. Later, if government publishes all the provisions of the deal, please pay attention to that as well, because right now it's a classified document. We do have some reports, but it's all media speculation. Officially, government has not informed the public as to what exactly are the terms of the deal. All right. So it is a very big development, right? It ends an insurgency. So please look out for any updates in current affairs regarding the peace deal. Now, let's take a look at Mizoram, right? Mizoram, Tripura, and after that we will close this chapter. But I see that the time is already 9:25. I think we can take a break. Let's take a breakfast break, a 30 minutes break. All right, let's come back at 10 a.m. We will start with the regular Sunday class. I just need maybe another 40 minutes, 45 minutes to finish this chapter, and we will head towards the next important topics. So I'll look at some questions now. Just give me 5 minutes and we'll close the class by 9:30. Nikhil is asking, looks like the government has created this problem in Manipur primarily by distinguishing between land rights of domiciles of the same state instead of securing everyone's rights to their land. No, Nikhil, I don't agree with this, because communities which are smaller in number, communities which are backward, which reside in remote areas, in hilly areas, they deserve additional protection. Just like we provide reservation for SCs, STs, right? There's a valid justification for that. Similarly, when it comes to protection of land of certain hill tribes, it is essential to distinguish between different communities. You can't say Metis are the same as Nagas and Kukis. They're not. Metis are in majority. They are the dominant group. I can understand they have some legitimate concerns, but you can't deny the distinction which has been created, right? Protection of land given to Kukis and Nagas in the hill areas was essential because they are in very small numbers. They are in very remote areas. They are very poor communities, backward communities. Whereas Metis were more influential, dominant politically and economically. So giving ST status to Nagas and Kukis was the correct thing to do, right? But addressing the ethnic divide, the hatred between the communities was essential. Metis shouldn't have taken offense for the ST status which was given to the Kukis and Nagas. At the same time, I'll be fair here. I'll not be biased. Kukis and Nagas should not have used armed threats against Metis as well. They created an insecurity amongst the Metis because of their armed organizations. So mistakes lie on both the sides. Providing ST status was not the problem. Not addressing the ethnic divisions, that was the mistake. This has persisted since many decades. Kanchana is asking, when we see whole of Manipur, Imphal is encroached in the middle. Imphal is not encroached. Imphal is where Metis are present. Historically, that has been the place where Metis are concentrated. It's not an encroached area. Encroachment means an occupation, right? Metis have not occupied it. That is where Metis are living from centuries. In the same question, Kanchana is asking, sir, Nagas are there in Nagaland as well, but here in Manipur, they have ST status. Correct. Nagas in Nagaland will not have that. But Nagas in Manipur have ST status. Why? Because Nagas in Manipur are in minority. They are residing in a remote hill area. Please remember, there are many subgroups and subclans of Nagas. In fact, in Nagaland, all Nagas don't have tribal status. They're not called a scheduled tribe. They are called as an ethnic group. Only few minority Nagas, Few backward Naga subgroups and clans, especially in Manipur, only they have ST status and reservation. So Kanchana also has the similar point like Nikhil. She says Metis have no choice. If you look at the bigger picture, I think government should give more power and SC status to Methi. No, again, I don't agree with this at all. In fact, not just me, most experts don't agree with this. ST status is not the problem. Majority dominant communities cannot demand ST status. Now, let's say the committee which has recommended ST status, obviously it would be based on empirical data. If it is established that indeed Metis are also backward, that at least some Metis deserve ST status, then let the government give ST status. This is where dialogue has to be established to convince the Kukis and Nagas that giving ST status to Metis is not a threat. So ST status given to Nagas and Kukis is not the root of the problem. Addressing the issue is the problem, right? Fine, provide Metis SC status as well. The committee also has recommended this. It has gone into the depth of it. If there is empirical data to justify it, fine, give SC status to Metis. But ensure that there is harmony between the groups. This should not lead to a situation where the groups target each other, right? So that is something the state has to handle. Kanchana goes on to say, sir, this is a genocide by Kuki militants. They are killing Hindu Metis. See, this is pure propaganda. Don't fall for it. As I told you, move away from religious polarization. In this era, it's very important. As UPSC aspirants, move away from the communal polarization in the country. Metis might be Hindus, majority of them. But this conflict is not a religious conflict. It is the political parties which are giving it a religious color. So don't fall for this propaganda. The Methi Kuki Naga conflict goes back to 1960s. It is primarily an ethnic conflict. It's not about which religion they belong to. Understood? There are Methi Muslims as well. Kukis have targeted them. Methi Muslims are also part of some of the Methi armed outfits. So calling it a genocide against Methi Hindus is absolutely incorrect, because Kukis are also at the receiving end. This is an ethnic conflict, inter-ethnic conflict. This is not a religious conflict. There is no religious color to it. The communal anger has been added later in the last few months by political parties because they are serving their own agenda. They're trying to push communal polarization. Yara is asking who will take the charge to stop internet in a state. Is it center or state government? It is usually the center. The MHA can issue orders and it can order the suspension of communication. Right? Mobile internet services can be suspended, which was done in Manipur, in Punjab as well recently, right? Even in Jammu and Kashmir. Usually in such conflict areas, whenever security situation gets affected, mobile internet services are suspended. So Home Ministry can do it. Even the State Home Department will have similar powers to do it. So both center and state, they share that power. They can issue orders to the mobile and telecom companies to shut off the mobile and internet services. All right. So guys, these are the questions. So let's take the break, 30 minutes. We'll come back at 10 a.m.